The shortage of sanitary material at the worst of the pandemic distorted the market. According to the World Health Organization, in March of 2020 masks had multiplied their price by 6, and some respirators had tripled it. The supplies were sold to the highest bidder.
Spain has closed with China a purchase of material worth €432 million.
The European Union imported 92% of its supply of masks from the Asian country. In the first half of 2020, the competition was unprecedented, even between countries of the Union.
I remember having made a very early order in March for some kind of helmets or suits that came from Italy, and that the distributor called us that the truck that came with those helmets was going here to Spain. It had been stopped by the Italian government.
During the most difficult moments, the usual diplomacy between states was diluted. All the countries, all the governments went to the same country to buy the same materials, and the truth is that we had to decide in hours, because if you didn't do it at that moment, then surely the order you wanted to make of X million masks would be taken to another country, and then the prices were going up. This was really crazy, and the fake suppliers appeared, people apparently able to satisfy needs when no one could. 5 years later, some of these operations have ended up in the courts and grabbing headlines, such as the Coldo case or the masks case. The tense standoff over the death tolls in Madrid's care homes during COVID is set to go to court. The community of Madrid will sue Reyes Maroto for these words yesterday. And yes, there were 7,291 victims, or elderly people killed in these residences. As a result of non-referral, this type of accusations is very serious, and that is why we are also going to go to justice to request amparo, no longer for us, but for those professionals who do not have to continue listening to these attacks. Maroto has just retracted those words. The Madrid City Council has already said that it is cutting relations with the socialist group and the Madrid PP with the government delegation for this publication in networks of the delegate, who accuses the Ayuso government of leading to an undignified death to the elderly. This rupture is not a surprise, say the socialists.
Who is Mrs. Ayuso related to? Mrs. Ayuso is the only president in all of Spain who did not go to see the president of the government, the only one.
Today, at the center of the debate was the application of the referral protocols, which would have prevented during the pandemic from transferring patients from nursing homes to hospitals. The community of Madrid denies these protocols. The Minister of Health defends that they were a fact. It was a discriminatory protocol of the place where those people resided. How many people could we have saved, or how many people could we have helped to die? Right, instead of dying by drowning, dying by sedation. Garcia has insisted that there have always been alternatives for those patients. The association representing most of the victims maintains that Mazón's obligation, according to the law, was to take charge of the emergency.
The fact that I didn't have to be in the copy 1 so many times deleted as an excuse by the president is as if for him to drop the race back.
And they will ask the judge to testify as a witness. Mazón maintains his agenda, persecuted by the media and by the criticism on the street.
Ask for forgiveness. Thank you. Publicly.
Meanwhile, Feijóo, who still does not pronounce his name,
The question you refer to me.
he maintains his support, but today he adds that the scope of the investigation will have to be seen.
And I want it to be investigated to the end. The 227 dead in Valencia needs us politicians to investigate and assume the responsibilities that correspond to us.
The socialists denounce Genoa's inaction. Feijóo could have dismissed him, and he hasn't. Well, let's throw it out all the Valencians and the Valencian women. Let them let us vote, and we will decide. And the Emmet insists
that there was more than enough information.
He points out that the judicial orders support it. It is impossible to make the purchase.
I just asked about a leg of lamb 29.9.
The fresh stuff, the fruit, the vegetables, they notice it in the shopping cart. Prices have been rising 4 or 5 months in a row, and even though core inflation, which excludes unprocessed food and energy, is at its lowest rate in 3 years, at 2.2%. What happened? That electricity is more expensive than in 2024 because of the tax increase. Now, they have put 21% olive oil on us, so now it is quite noticeable. In 1 year, electricity has become more expensive by more than 28%. Chocolate and oils have also risen. The Olive oil, on the other hand, has gone down. Yes, it's true. Hey, I bought. Look, he's going to throw you and he's taken it down. The government emphasizes that we are better off than a year and a half ago.
What we have is a continuation of this moderation of prices, with some very positive contribution of some components that worried the citizens a lot, such as olive oil, which continues to decline.
At the other extreme, fuels and lubricants for vehicles pulled down inflation in February. It is the Guadalquivir as it passes through Cordoba. It exceeds 2 meters. The danger of overflow is vigilant. The Malaga reservoir of Casasola is also of concern. In Yarez, the situation of the Guadalete is stabilizing. The evicted neighbors can now return home. In Toledo, the Tagus is still very grown. The water has reached the campus, but without causing incidents. The storm is leaving mostly cold and snow. This is Navacerrada, Madrid, and so it is since this morning, the north of Castellón, Nevada and Ars del Maestrat.
Small but welcome.
There is an orange warning in Cantabria. The capital found out the first flakes of winter when it is about to end. In Panticosa and Portalet, trucks cannot circulate. About 20 roads are cut off nationwide due to rain or snow.
The ceasefire in Ukraine is still far away. The Ukrainian army has launched drones against a Russian refinery, Moscow neighborhoods, and the occupied Kherson region. Russia continues its offensive. For Zelensky, the Kremlin is manipulating to delay the truce. Kiev agrees to stop for 30 days, as proposed by the United States, and asks Moscow to do the same. Putin says he is ready to accept the ceasefire, but also sets conditions that Ukraine will not rearm, and expresses doubts about who would monitor the truce. He wants European troops. Promising, but incomplete, Trump qualifies the words of Putin, with whom he wants to meet. His envoy to Moscow flies back to Washington with a private message from the Russian president. Russia has already managed to expel almost all Ukrainian troops from the Kursk region. There are corpses, destruction, and a few neighbors who greet the soldiers.
The G7 calls on Russia to accept the ceasefire agreement proposed by the United States or face further sanctions. The foreign ministers of the most powerful nations of the world gathered in Canada have signed a final declaration in which they emphasize that safe and credible agreements are needed to ensure that Ukraine can prevent and, if necessary, defend itself from a possible new aggression.
It will not be easy, it will not be simple. But we certainly feel like we're at least some steps closer to ending this war.
In Germany, the foreseeable future chancellor, the conservative Merz, announces an agreement to increase that spending on defense and security already had the support of the Social Democrats. Now adds the Greens. He needs them to reform the constitution and to be able to borrow massively to face that rearmament.
Pope Francis entered the hospital on the 14th of February suffering from bronchitis that had been dragging on for a long time. It began to be noticed at the public events he presided over, hearings in which he could not finish the speeches.
With mild bronchitis and in a well.
Although they started treating him with cortisone at the Vatican, they finally decided to admit him to the hospital. The first analyses indicated that the clinical picture was more complex than previously thought. He was immediately diagnosed with bilateral pneumonia caused by a polymicrobial infection. During this time, the Pope has suffered 4 respiratory crises that have forced doctors to aspirate his bronchi. She came to need a blood transfusion, and there was a moment when all the alarms went off. While the fake news spread, some even talked about that he had died, and they were hiding it. A current of solidarity spread halfway around the world. Since then, a rosary has been prayed daily in St. Peter's Square for his health, so that he may recover soon. For a few days now, Dad has been talking about the critical situation he was in. The treatment is working, the lungs are improving, and the doctors have lifted the reserved prognosis. He continues to need oxygen permanently, even at night, through a mechanical ventilation that blows air into his lungs. Today, the rumors of conclave have dissipated, and the question that is repeated the most is when they are going to discharge him. But the doctors are still prudent and always remind us that the clinical picture is still complex, and that we should not forget that this is an 88-year-old patient. The Economist card is now officially the new Prime Minister of Canada. He took office at a ceremony in Ottawa in the presence of the Governor-General, and with what will be his new team, Justin Trudeau, who announced his resignation earlier this year. says goodbye to his more than 9 years at the helm of the executive. Now his successor has a complicated relationship with his neighbor, the United States. Ahead of him, Carney has since said that he is looking forward to talking to Trump and has made it clear that Canada will never be the United States.